All right, everyone, let's get started with today's Tech Leader Power Lunch. Today's topic is choosing between a full-time and a consulting role. I've heard from a lot of you that you're torn between these two choices, and so I want to go through a process for you today to help you make a decision about where you want to focus your long-term career. So with that, today's focus is number one, talking about the differences and myths between consulting and full-time work. These are a lot of the things I hear, people thinking that consulting is one way or full-time work is another way, and making their choices off of these things that are actually myths. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same level playing field about what each of those is, what the pros and cons are, so that you can make the decision from more of a fact-based place versus a place of making assumptions that aren't necessarily true anymore. And then I want to share with you, and this will be workshop style, so grab your notebook and pen, and we'll go through a decision-making framework that you can use to decide on which direction you want to take. And this can really be leveraged for any type of decision that you're trying to make, either in your professional life or in your personal life. So if you're not faced with this specific dilemma today, don't worry, because this will give you some fuel for a future decision on full-time versus consulting, and a general framework on how to make difficult decisions that you can use for anything. So with that, let's dive in. For those of you who don't know me yet, I am Melissa Lieberman. I am a career coach and business coach who helps tech leaders and independent consultants achieve their career and business goals. And I help my clients with whatever they're stuck in their career, or if they're doing really well and wanting to take it to the next level. We work together one-on-one to really figure out where their gaps are, how to overcome those gaps. And most of the time, the gaps are really self-imposed. So helping them get through those patterns and themes that they normally might, it's that saying, what got you here won't get you there. And that's really what I help my clients to figure out what got them here that's really working and they want to amplify, and also what got them here but isn't going to get them there and what we want to replace that with. So that's what I do in real life. Here on today's Tech Leader Power Lunch, I like to share some of the best practices and other strategies that I share with those one-on-one clients to reach a larger audience. So with that, let's dive in for today. So let's talk first about the basic differences between full-time and consulting or contract work. So from a full-time perspective, things that are slightly different than what you would see in a typical consulting engagement are leadership opportunities. Generally speaking, consulting or contract work is not the place where you're managing a large team. Now that, you could argue that in the sense of a lot of times it's a project-based work, so you are indirectly managing people. This is what I'm talking about on the full-time side, is more of the actual people management and ultimate responsibility for people's career growth and trajectory as well as yours. The other thing that's different about what I see, the other thing that's different in a full-time role is that you're an insider. You're part of the company. You have a lens from that vantage point versus from the outside looking in. And sometimes that could be the type of dynamic that you're looking for. Another difference is that there is a more traditional career trajectory or path for you, although no guarantees, right? Versus consulting, you're making your own path. You're not moving up the ladder in the traditional sense. You're creating your own ladder for yourself. And for some of us, we love that flexibility and ambiguity. And for others, they like to have that structure and the titles and the achievement, that feeling of achievement that goes with it. Full-time typically includes benefits. This is something that I hear so much about. I need the insurance, so I'm definitely going to work full-time. And I want to talk more about that here in a minute. And then opportunities for training. A lot of times there is some form of training, uh, professional development type work, and access to that internally that you have to create on your own as an independent. And then finally, the compensation is governed by the employer. I mean, certainly you can propose, you can request, you can deliver and hope that's recognized. But at the end of the day, the employer creates those compensation structures. So that's what I see from a differences point of view when I look at full-time type opportunities. If you have something else to add, put those in the chat and we can have that dialogue as well if you're here live. And then on the other side of the equation, the independent consulting or contract type work, the differences there are the number one, first and foremost, is the flexibility. You get the flexibility with the schedule, with the type of work, with the type of clients. You're an outsider, which sometimes can be beneficial. You're looked at as potentially a neutral, trusted advisor, someone who doesn't have skin in the game in the same way that people do that are working internally. So sometimes that gives you a lot more access within an organization than you would have otherwise. For independent consulting and contracting, you're choosing your own trajectory. No one creates some org structure for you or some ladder of job titles. You're making all of that up on your own. And you are also setting your own revenue or your own compensation ceiling. So those are some of the differences that I see. And I just wanted to get us kind of all on the same thought pattern here as we start to dive in on making a choice between the two. Tell me in the chat if you're here live what you see the difference is. Anything else that I didn't call out here as something you see as a big difference between focusing on a full-time career versus an independent consulting or contract type focus of your career. So with that as a level playing field, nothing shocking here, right? I want to talk about a few of the myths. Myths. The biggest two that I hear on the full-time side is that it's more secure. Full-time is more secure, it's more stable. And I submit to you today that that's not true. I think a lot of us figured that out last year, right? When everything blew up and people were being let go, when they had, impeccable track records. Like nothing in this world is certain or guaranteed, right? It doesn't have to mean full-time doesn't necessarily mean that it's more secure and more stable. A lot of times we choose to be full-time because we think that, and we then cut out the other options because we think that they're not as stable, not as secure, and it doesn't have to be that way. A lot of people think it's easier full-time. Not necessarily that the work is easier, but that all of the infrastructure makes it easier. The benefits, the resources around you, the the hierarchy and people to lean on if you make a mistake, all of that. And that doesn't necessarily have to be true either. It doesn't necessarily mean one is easier or one is harder. They're just different. And I want to point out these myths to you because if you are like most of us believing these are just facts, then a lot of times we drive our decisions off of things that feel like it's just the truth, when in fact it doesn't have to be kind of the way it is. And therefore you're cutting off all of the other options that are there available to you based on something that is an assumption that isn't necessarily a fact. And having a hard time today. Similarly, I'll just take a moment and tell you, I've been working on my podcast and I'm like recording everything like 12 times. That's why my tongue is tied. I think it's a learning curve. It's a new skill set. Anyway, okay, so the myths on the consulting side. One of the myths is that you need to have a strong existing network who will hire you. You're not going to be the myth is you're not going to be successful if you don't already have kind of this pre-built list of clients. That's not true. It certainly gives you a leg up for sure. I mean, if you have it, then that's a leg up for sure. But it doesn't mean that you have to have it in order to be successful. I've worked with a lot of clients who haven't had that and have been very successful in landing new work with people they've just met and have built relationships with. The other myth is that you need to know everything. Somehow you're this someone bestowed upon you the label of expert. And it arrives at some point in your career after you've accomplished some arbitrary list of things, or you've reached a certain age, or your hair is a certain new grayish tone. That doesn't have to be true either, because most of us discount what we know or think it's just kind of common knowledge, nothing special about it. And then we just dismiss the ability to go into consulting for reasons that are not valid. Another myth that I find is that the lack of benefits are a showstopper. This comes up all the time. I talk to people, I would love to consult. I would love the flexibility. I understand that it can be challenging from a business development perspective, and there are different, nuances to what I need to learn and be good at, but I just can't take a role that doesn't have benefits. It's not an option for me. And that's it. That's the end of the story. They really want to do it, but they feel like the benefits, especially insurance, are a showstopper. And I say to them, well, tell me more. Tell me what you found. Tell me how much it would cost. Tell me how much compensation you would need to bridge that gap. And they just stare at me. I don't know. Never looked. You can't make a decision about your career having never researched this type of thing and just taking it for what it is and assuming that it's a showstopper. It's just simply not true. I have clients that have solved this problem. I have colleagues and peers that have solved this problem. So many of us out there who are independently employed who have solved this problem. I'm not telling you that you're going to get the same amount of insurance for the same cost. Generally speaking, that's not true. However, it isn't an insurmountable issue that should just stop you from considering this as a path if it's something you're interested in pursuing. Secondarily, if you go through another firm, like a staffing firm, a lot of times they will offer those types of benefits. Now, there's pros and cons to that. They take a lot of your rate, to compensate for that and other things. So, but there's other ways you can crack this nut besides just saying, I have to dismiss this option altogether. Another myth that I hear a lot is consulting requires a lot of travel. A lot of us have this perception because we might have been a consultant. I know I was one early in my career at Accenture. Of course, there was a lot of travel. Every week I was going to the same place. In fact, I moved into a hotel, literally kept the room 7 days a week, like moved all my clothes there, rearranged the furniture, all of it, right? It was a lot of travel. And for most of us, that's how we think of consulting. It's a lot of travel. You have to be on the client site. I don't want to put in that kind of time anymore and energy. But that is also not a myth, especially now in the last year, all of the changes and all of the companies that have become so much more effective working remotely. That's not to say that you're not going to ever travel, but it certainly really takes the bar to another level of why travel and why is it important and what is the business reason. I was before focusing on coaching full time, I was an independent consultant for 7 years, 7 of these last 9 years. I had corporate clients. I think in 7 years, I probably took, I don't know, 8 trips, literally 8 trips in 7 years that were for a client. And most of those were because I wanted to go meet the client and leave my home and these children, to be honest. So it doesn't have to be structured in a way where you're on the road every week. Even before, in my example, right? Even before COVID, it didn't have to be that way. It's about you setting up a structure where your client gets the value and the benefits, and they understand that you don't need to be there in order to deliver that in a lot of cases. And then finally, a myth is that it's hard to succeed. It's really hard. Selling is hard, marketing is hard. I have to somehow be a business owner and deliver at the same time. It all feels very hard, and I would rather just stay kind of in this simpler full-time role. And I will just submit to you that this is also a myth. It doesn't have to be hard. Quite frankly, it's as hard as we make it. And a lot of times we're designed to make it hard on ourselves. I know for me, I make things, I just recognized this pattern recently. You may have heard me say this before. I really value hard things. I value that I'm someone who can do hard things. And what I've noticed in the last few years was I was making things harder just to make them more valuable. When you start stripping away those kinds of beliefs about yourself, it can make things so much more simple. So you may relate to what I'm sharing with you, or you may have another version of that. But thinking it's hard right away is what ends up resulting in you making it harder than it needs to be. And it doesn't have to be hard. There's very simple ways to run a consulting practice and with the business hat on, as well as the delivery hat on, and to have the flexibility, which is why you would, one of the reasons why you would do this in the first place. Okay, share with me your thoughts on what these myths are if you're here live. Any to add or argue with me over, and we'll come back to that at the end. Okay, so now let's talk about diving in. Now that we kind of have a level playing field about full-time versus consulting work and what it means and what it doesn't mean, let's think about if you're making this choice or you're just making another choice. You can replace whatever your choice is with in this framework that I'm about to give you, whatever your decision is. This is a very powerful framework that you can use to make any decision. So the first place you want to be is to really distance yourself from this moment, this day to day, this challenges that you might be facing with whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe you're in a full-time role and considering leaving, or maybe you're in a consulting role and it feels really rocky and you're wondering if you should go back. Wherever you're at, let's take ourselves out of that day to day and really zoom out to a place where the day to day challenges are no longer an issue. It's 5 years from now. If you need to zoom out further, go for that too. Sometimes 5 years isn't enough distance to get out of some of the mind drama that's occurring right now. Okay, so the first question for you, and you can write this down in your journal as we go. I'm going to give you a little bit of time, but not too much, is what do you want to accomplish in your professional life? So again, we're not thinking about this in the context of this choice versus this choice. We're just asking ourselves more broadly, like, what is it that I want to accomplish? If I think there's no constraints, no realisticness of anything, what is it that I want to accomplish? The next question is, what kind of lifestyle do you want? Again, take the blinders off of your current context and just think ahead 5 years. What is the lifestyle that you want to have? Another good question, what's on your professional bucket list? What do you want to have accomplished in your career? You might even zoom out to retirement for this. Like, what are those things that you want to have accomplished? And the really kind of $1 million question here is, what option would you choose if both of them, if in 5 years you're looking back and both of them would have been wildly successful? What does your gut say? A lot of times our gut tells us, or our intuition, whatever you want to call it, and then we start arguing with it. What is that initial reaction that you have? If both options you were considering turn out to be wildly successful, which of the two would you choose? And finally, why? And you can go back through all of these and ask yourself why. Okay, hopefully that gave you a tiny bit of time to start thinking about the vision aspect of this. And again, to repeat, because it's so important, the vision here is not about thinking about the perceived constraints, the perceived what if I fails, all of that stuff that fits into that bucket. Here, it's much more about what is possible for me. If I, think back to when you were in high school or college. I know for me, it was like the sky is the limit. I can do anything. I wasn't sitting there thinking, like, well, what if this bad thing happens or what if that bad thing happens? You were probably like that too before like the realities of life started pounding down and making us have a lot more caution in our lives, right? Get back to that place where if anything was possible for you, and it is, we'll talk with you about that here in a second. What would you choose? What would you want to be doing? Why would you make a choice from I'm going to be realistic, I'm going to be practical, and making yourself small before you even start? That is the vision step of this process. The second step of this process is looking at the obstacles. There are, I'll use the word considerations, not practicalities or realities, but considerations to take into account as you start thinking about this, whatever your choice is, choosing between full-time and consulting in this example. But I want you to look at these in a slightly different way, because a lot of times the way we approach decisions is like picking the best of the worst outcome. Like these two things, probably this bad thing is going to happen, or this bad thing is going to happen, or this is reality and this is reality, or this is being practical or that's being practical. And we kind of choose the best of the two worst, versus looking at this the opposite way and seeing where we're finding the obstacles and where they're not actually obstacles, where they're actually the myths, like I shared a minute ago. So the first question here to uncover what are real obstacles versus perceived obstacles, and the perceived obstacles are the ones that are keeping us in our comfort zone, quite frankly. The first question is noticing where your logical side is arguing with you. So I don't know if it's necessarily a question or more of a comment here, but what my point is like we make a decision, this is based on our vision, and then our logical side starts arguing with us. Notice what that is for you. Where is your logical side starting to argue with you? Well, John, what about that? What about those benefits and the family, right? Or, well, Jane, what about all the time that you're going to have to spend? What about your family with that? Like, whatever the things are, really look at and just notice where your logical side is arguing with you. Those are things that are trying to keep you in your comfort zone. And ask yourself for each one of those, why not? Why doesn't what my logical side is saying have to be true? And then the last piece of this is like, why is when we know what's not true or doesn't have to be true, even though it feels like a fact, well, there's less benefits in full-time versus consulting. Yeah, that's probably true. However, does that mean that you can't get the benefits that you need at a cost that will be workable, given the fact that you'll be making more money in consulting or whatever it is? How is that not true? How is it not true that the benefits are a showstopper? And then ask yourself, how is this thing that seems like a reason keeping me in my comfort zone? Because a lot of times, all of these arguments we create for ourselves that seem very logical and practical and we're reasonable human beings are really based in fear and scarcity and designed to keep us as a human in our comfort zone. And so you've got to unravel that, unpack that. That's what I do with my clients, is really helping them to see where they're putting on self-imposed limitations that are not real, that have workarounds, that have other ways to pursue them. that in some cases are just a mental construct and not even a thing, whatever it is. So for you, go through this work and really dive into those obstacles and figure it out. And then finally, decide. This is the principle that I teach my clients as well. It's called the DIE principle. We decide, we implement, and we evaluate. We go for it, but we don't look back, at least not for some period of time. Like, go do this for 2 years and really give it an honest try if that's what you want to do. Don't go do it for 30 days and then start second guessing yourself like, oh, this isn't going to work. Well, yeah, no kidding, it's not going to work. You gave it 30 days. And during the 30 days you were doing it, you were kind of on the fence about, should I stay or should I go? Wavering back and forth. Don't do that. No matter what you decide to do, commit to it being successful. Because a lot of times we feel like these things are out of our control, when in fact we have a lot more control than we realize. We're looking for the places where we don't have control versus looking for the places we do have control. And look at this from the perspective of, I'm going to be successful because I can figure it out, not because of anything external, not because of what kind of network I have, not because of what my perceptions are about the market. None of that. Decide for yourself that you're going to be successful with whatever you choose, and then go make that happen without using external things as an excuse. Okay, my friends, that went longer than I thought it would, but I still have some time for questions. So if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A. If you want to share something with me, put it in the chat if you're here live. Quickly, I have a resource for you. If you would what I love hearing is real life stories that help me get inspiration on what's possible for me. And so I put together a ebook for you on 27 real life stories of how my clients, and some of them are my own personal stories, have landed their own clients, to give you ideas, things that might not necessarily be in your realm of possibilities right now. Easy ways to find new clients, simple ways to find new clients and to build your pipeline as a consultant. So if that's of interest to you, the link is here, melissalieberman.com/27-clients, and you can download that ebook for free. As I mentioned a minute ago, I'm working on the podcast. I will tell you, I believe it'll go live on April 1st, April Fool's Day, except for Apple. Apple decides when it goes live, sometime after the 1st, between then and like the 15th. So anyway, Apple's in charge of everything.